evening, everybody. My name's Eddie. I'm an alcoholic. I am sober tonight by the grace of a power I call God, and it's a power I was asleep to before I experienced the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. What I mean when I say that is I don't keep me sober. It's not my job. I'm really, really bad at it. I tried it for a long time. I failed miserably. The belief that I could keep myself sober almost killed me. And then I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I almost died once I got here. You don't hear that in a lot of AA meetings, but it's true for me, and this is my truth. It was like we were playing a game of telephone in Alcoholics Anonymous. Do you know what telephone is? Imagine I whisper a kind of complicated sentence to this guy, and it goes up and down and around the room and around the room and around the room and around the room. And it gets over here, and I say to the end guy, I say, tell me what I just told him. How does it sound? A little different. Well, imagine that over 90 years and millions of alcoholics. Yeah, and the message gets a little weird. And so the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous were really smart people. They knew this would happen. So what they did is they wrote the entire program down in a book. So we couldn't screw it up. And I promise you this, if it comes out of my mouth from the front of the room tonight, I can show you where it comes from in the book. I'm not going to make it up. I'm not going to play the game of telephone. But when I first got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I heard some strange things. Like one of the things, the first woman I was at the first meeting I was at, a woman said to me, I just didn't know it was the alcohol. I was like surprised by that. You didn't know it was the alcohol? That's what I was going through my head. Because I knew it was the alcohol by the time I was 17. I drove my first car into a parked car at 40 miles an hour. The first person I saw was a police officer in uniform. He dragged me out of the car, dropped me on the ground, and he kicked me. Yeah. It was his car that I hit. Not a good thing. And it occurred to me the next morning I needed to stop drinking. But this woman said something else, which I could not relate to. She said, well, once I knew it was alcohol, I stopped. I said, that's strange, because I knew it was alcohol when I was 17. Do you know what I did for the next 22 years? Drank alcohol. In other words, for me, knowing I shouldn't drink does not keep me from drinking. We have a very special name for you if that's true. Alcoholic. In fact, if knowing you shouldn't drink keeps you from drinking, why are you here? Just know you shouldn't drink and you go away. But then I got a second piece of information when I was 18. My uncle came over and had a chat with me. He had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1955. And he explained to me if I was going to stop drinking, I couldn't have even one drink. Which by the time I was 18, I already knew about myself. I knew if I was going to stop, this was sort of an all or nothing deal. It made perfect sense. But then when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, they put it this way. They said, just don't take the first drink and you won't get drunk. And I remember thinking, I must look stupid. Like, I know if I don't take a drink, I won't get drunk. But knowing that, I've known that all my life. But knowing that never kept me from taking the drink. See, I'm an alcoholic. Bill Wilson talks about this in our big book, these two ideas. He writes this, I woke up, this had to be stopped. I saw that I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. And he says, before that, I wrote lots of sweet promises, but this time my wife happily observed that I meant business, and so I did. So here we see Bill Wilson like me. He wakes up, he knows he needs to stop, he knows it's the first drink. Does any of that help Bill? Well, let me tell you what the next sentence says. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. What's he trying to explain? He's trying to explain that knowing he shouldn't drink, knowing it's the first drink, didn't keep him from drinking. It's part of what it is to be an alcoholic. But I didn't understand any of that. I got this other thing going on that nobody likes to talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like a big secret. But over the next 22 years, I stopped drinking countless times. Any of you had that experience? Every time I stopped, I had the exact same experience. The longer I was sober, the worse I felt. The more uncomfortable I felt. Until I couldn't stand to feel that way anymore. And you know how I fixed it? I drank. Turns out I don't have an alcohol problem. That would be really easy to fix. Don't drink alcohol. What I suffer from is a really bad sobriety problem. And the longer I'm sober, the worse I feel. Until I can't take it anymore. And then I drink. So 22 years ago, a little more than 22 years ago, I drove home from Albany, New York with my kids in the backseat of the car. So drunk, I don't remember how I got home. That's a long drive. And I got a call from my identical twin brother. He's also an alcoholic. He had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a call from him a couple days later. He's a little different than I am. I started drinking at 13. He didn't start drinking until he was 33. Who starts drinking at 33? He did. But he got to AA before me, so he's smarter than I am. He was a multi-million-dollar-a-year corporate attorney, and as I was drinking vodka out of a plastic squeeze bottle, he was drinking Johnny Walker Blue. I didn't know Johnny Walker came in blue. It turns out it's $300 a bottle. Alcoholics don't drink that. But he had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he called me up and he had one of those conversations you may have had with somebody at one point in your life. He said to me, you know, you need to do something about your drinking. I said, I have. He said, what's that? I said, I'm not drinking anymore. And he asked me a question which stuck with me. And I want you to think about the question he asked me. I just told him I wasn't drinking. This is what he said. He said, how's that working out for you? How is not drinking working out for you? So he understood if I'm not drinking, it's not working out. I said, it's not. He said, why don't you go to AA? I said, I'm not doing that. He called back 2 weeks later. He said, how's the not drinking thing going? I said, it's getting worse. And you know what I'm talking about? It up here is getting worse. He said, why don't you go to AA? I said, what are they going to do for me in AA? He said something about the 12 steps in a big book. And I did what any self-respecting alcoholic would do at 7:30 on a Sunday night. I drove over to Borders to get a big book. Your local bookstore, you should try it. It's a fun experience. I walked into the bookstore, walked up to the information counter, and I said this, hi, I'd like a big book. And the woman looks at me and goes, how big a book would you like? Because the really big books are over there. That's where they had like the large coffee table books. And I said, never mind. And I wandered around the store in the self-help section. They had the plain blue leather version of the big book. You know what I'm talking about? They didn't have the one with this blue and yellow screaming cover that says Alcoholics. And I'm not sure I walk around Borders with this. But the plain blue one was pretty good. So I get up. By the way, it's in the self-help section, which is really funny to me today. Now that I understand the book, the entire premise of the book, now think about this for a second. The premise of the book is you can't help yourself. It's in the self-help section. Whoever put it there either didn't read it or didn't understand it. But anyway, I get to the register, go to ring it up, and it says error on the little display screen. Do you know what they do in Borders when it says error on the display screen? It goes like this. Price check on Alcoholics Anonymous at register 1. And I'm like horrified. Anyway, I give them their $22 or whatever it was because they screw you over at Borders. And I get in the car and I start to read this book and it's awful. I mean, have you tried to read this book? It reads like it was written in the 1930s by a Protestant from Vermont. Yeah, it was. But the language is old-fashioned. It uses one of the phrases in here. It says, we smile at such a Sally. The hell writes like that? Anyway, I read all night because when I don't drink, I have trouble sleeping. Anybody relate? And I called my brother the next morning at 6 a.m. down in Dallas. He answered the phone. Hello. I said, well, I got the big book. He said, oh, good. How was the meeting? I said, I didn't go to a meeting. I went to Borders. And he laughed. He said, well, what do you think of the book? I said, you know, it reminds me of this self-help program I had done 10 years earlier. One of those Tony Robbins Powerful Living Self-Help So You Can Walk on Water and Be Everything programs. He said, AA is not a self-help program. You obviously missed something. And by the way, it's 5 a.m. in Dallas. Don't call me this early. And he hung up. Who was I thinking about at 6 a.m. when I called my brother? Me. What does it turn out is the root of alcoholism? Turns out it's selfishness and self-centeredness. That we think is the root of our trouble. So much so that at the beginning of the book, they write this sentence. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers, that's a pretty strongly worded sentence, depend upon, well, you probably better know the rest of the sentence if you want to live, our constant thought of others and how we might help meet their needs. Not me. It was all about me. Then I read the book 3 or 4 more times over the next 3 or 4 more weeks, and I finally decide I'll go to one of these stupid meetings. Maybe someone will explain to me what I don't understand. And I go to the meeting figuring they're going to explain all the stuff in this book to me. And I sit down and I start with a war story. How many of you have heard a war story? Yeah? I was shot, beaten, stabbed, covered in blood. And I'm listening to the war story, and this is my thought. I think, I already know how to do this part. When are we going to get to the what I have to do part? He got to the end of the war story. He said, but ever since I stopped drinking, everything got wonderful. And they all clapped, you know. And I'm thinking, how? Who's going to tell me how? And then they started raising their hands. And I thought, oh, thank God. I'm sure they're going to tell me how. Well, I mean, the first woman sort of told me how. She told me how she parked her car in a handicap spot but didn't have a handicap permit and how they gave her a parking ticket. Do you know what she shared about for 3 minutes? Her parking ticket. And the next guy was in a suit and tie, and he stood up when he shared. He said, I haven't had a drink in 10 years. I thought, thank God. He said, but I'm going through an awful divorce. You know what he talked about for the next few minutes? His divorce. And one after another, they went in a room kind of complaining about their lives. And I'm sitting thinking to myself, I am never coming back here to listen to you people complain about your life. And somehow they knew I was thinking that. You know how I know? Because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm never coming back. And this little old lady leaned over and said something to me to indicate to me that she knew I wasn't coming back. She said, keep coming back. And I thought, what a strange thing to say. How does she know I'm not coming back? Anyway, I went back. The same thing happened the next meeting. The third meeting was a little different because this guy sat next to me decided he wanted to be my friend. Have you had that happen to you? It's kind of strange. I mean, he must want something, a ride, a money, a smoke. He wants something from me. He didn't. At the end of the war story, though, he elbows me and he says, share. I said, share what? He said, anything you want. Now, this is going to be a productive group if we all just come here and share anything we want. But anyway, I said, okay, so I raised my hand and I started talking about my favorite subject. You know what my favorite subject is? Me! Every problem, issue, and complaint that I have. Do you know who I think about before I share about me? Me! Do you know who I think about while I'm sharing about me? Me! And then after I'm done sharing about me, I listen around the room to see if anybody says anything about anything I said because I'm really concerned with me. This is bad. Because at the root of alcoholism is selfishness and self-centeredness, and I'm just being more selfish and self-centered at these meetings. Then they tell me the magic of the program. You've all heard the magic. Meeting makers make it. Matter of fact, it's so important that I'll give you $1,000 in cash if you can show me when they wrote this book where they say the meeting makers make a damn thing. It's not in there. You think if it was important, you would put it in there. So maybe a little line that said, meeting makers do a little bit better. But I start going to more than one meeting a day. Any of you ever tried that plan? I get to go to the 6 a.m. sunrise meeting, the noon lunchtime meeting, the 4:30 happy hour meeting, the 7:30 regular meeting. And some nights I used to go to a midnight meeting at a place called The Pit. That's in Bayshore. That's an experience you must not miss. Every meeting I'd raise my hand and I'd talk about my favorite subject. Me! Am I getting better or sicker? Sicker. Then you tell me to get a support group. That'll help. That's 5 or 6 people I can call every night and complain to them about me. This is not going well. Then you tell me to get a home group. I got one of those. They told me to get a sponsor. I got the old man of the group. He'd been sober since the Civil War. Every night I called him and I complained to him about me. He'd listen for a while, and then he'd say this, did you drink today, kid? I'd say, no. He said, that's great. Call me tomorrow. I was being sponsored. And then he told me to mop floors and stack chairs and make coffee, because, well, that'll help. And finally, I get to where we left, where it says in page 152, it says he cannot picture his life without alcohol. Someday he'll be unable to imagine his life either with alcohol or without it. Then he will know a loneliness such as few do. He will be at the jumping off place. He will wish for the end. Anybody know what he's wishing for the end of? His life. So the leading cause of death in Alcoholics Anonymous today is suicide. I walk out of this meeting, 4 months I haven't had a drink. I look like hell. A guy looks at me and says, you look awful. I said, I'm thinking about killing myself. He said, do you know what you need to do? I said, oh, please tell me. He said, you just need to go to more meetings. Oh, come on, you've all been told that. And I said, I go to 4 meetings a day. And he goes, well, I don't know what to tell you. And I remember thinking, thanks for sharing all that hope. I went home and went to one last meeting online on AOL. Any remember AOL? You've got mail. And I went to the AA chat room, and I typed in the room, I'm done, and the guy wrote back with his phone number, so I called him. He answered the phone. He said he was a recovered alcoholic. I said, you're a what? He said he was a recovered alcoholic. I told him there was no such thing. You'll always be recovering. That's what I heard. He said, who told you that? I said, the people in AA. He said, that doesn't come from AA. I said, yes, it does. He said, no, it doesn't. He said, do you own a big book? I said, I don't understand that book. He said, oh, you'll understand this. Open it up to the title page and read what it says on the title page of the book. Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. He said, what do you think? I said, I don't think they meant that. He said, well, read the first sentence they wrote in the book. It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous and more than 100 men and women have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I said, I still don't think they meant it. He said, read the next sentence. Says to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. I said, I'm starting to think that maybe they meant recovered. He said, well, they wrote it 13 times. Nowhere do they suggest you're always going to be recovering. So the next person tells you that, ask them this question, say, where did that come from? Because it didn't come from the Alcoholics Anonymous. We're named after the book. It is our program. So I said, okay. He said, tell me what precisely means. So I told him it means exactly. He said, good. Tell me precisely what you're doing in Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, I'm a drunk. He said, not why you're here. Tell me what you do. I said, well, I go to 2 or 3 or 4 meetings a day. I raise my hand and share. I mop the floors. I stack the chairs. I make the coffee. I call 5 or 6 other drunks every night. I complain about my life. I don't usually listen when they complain about theirs. I call this guy as my sponsor. I complain to him about my life. He says, did you drink? I say, no. He says, good, call me tomorrow. He said, that's what you're doing. I was a smartass. I said, precisely. And then he asked me this question. He said, who told you that stuff would get you sober? I said, wait, that's exactly what they told me would get me sober. He said, who? I said, I don't know, the people I've been listening to. He said, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to read the book one more time tonight. I know you don't understand it much, but I want you to find for me precisely where it says to do any of that stuff. He says, you won't find any of that stuff in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I suppose if that's what you do, you will always be recovering and relapsing and recovering and relapsing. Or you can do precisely what the people who wrote that book did, and you can recover too. Millions of us have recovered. You can recover too. Do you know what that guy gave me that night for the first time ever? Hope. And then he started to take me through the big book, one line at a time. And every time I got to a sentence where I was supposed to do something, he would say to me, have you done that yet? I'd say, no. He'd say, well, call me back when you have, and he'd hang up. First thing he showed me was what it meant to be an alcoholic. So I didn't know. I was calling myself an alcoholic in my teens. Oh, I'm such an alcoholic. Having no understanding of what that meant. He showed me what it meant. According to the big book, and actually my own experience, but we'll get to that, he said, the big book says that I've lost the power to choose whether I'll drink or not. Lost the power to choose. I didn't like that. I said, no, I can choose. He said, you think you chose? I said, yeah. He goes, where does the power of choice come from? I said, my brain. He said, what are the elements of choice? I said, what do you mean? He goes, what do you have to choose? Anything. To vote, who to vote for, what kind of car to buy. What do you have to have? I said, well, the first thing you have to have is knowledge. He said, oh, good. He said, is there anything else? I couldn't think of it. He said, memory of experience. Anybody ever rode a motorcycle? You ever burn yourself on the muffler? Bet you don't put your leg back there anymore, do you? Because the memory of experience will keep you from doing something. So I said, okay, knowledge and memory of experience, got it. And he goes, good, let's find out if you have the power of choice. He said, did you know you needed to stop drinking? I said, yes. He said, did that stop you? I said, no. I went, oh boy. He said, let's try the other one. Did you have bad experiences as a result of drinking? I said, yeah. He said, did those experiences stop you? I said, no. The book says there's a complete failure of the same defense that keeps him from putting his hand on a hot stove. Turns out that defense is knowledge and memory. I have a complete failure of that. If I don't have the power to choose whether I'll drink or not, and you tell me, just don't drink, have you helped me? I don't know. But anyway, he then took me, I said to him, when I realized, I looked backwards on my life and I saw that this was true, that nothing I knew now or nothing I ever knew was going to keep me from drinking, I said, I'm screwed. He said, we actually prefer the word powerless. It looks better when you hang it up in front of a room. But it was the first time in my life I understood what powerless meant. I was powerless over whether I was going to choose to drink or not. And I said to him, you got to help me. He said, I can't. I'm human power. They read it at a lot of the beginners' meetings. You know how it works? A, we're alcoholics and couldn't manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could relieve our alcoholism. Page 43 puts it like this. It says, once more. You know why you start a sentence with the words once more? Because it's the third time you've said the same thing. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Now I said, now I'm really screwed. He said, why is that? I said, I don't believe in God. He said, why don't you believe in God? I said, well, primarily because I've been cursed with the ability to think. And the idea that there's some God out there is like believing in Santa Claus. He said Santa Claus was a good analogy. We should play with that for a second. He asked me, if you go to the North Pole, will you find a fat guy making toys for little kids? I said, no. He said, good. So you know there's no such thing as a person called Santa Claus. I said, that's right. He said, if you go to a toy store in mid-December, will you find evidence of a power that we call Santa Claus? Will you find parents waiting in line to buy presents to give to their children in an anonymous name? I said, yes. He said, a pretty powerful force? I said, yes. He said, well, you're looking for a person called God, and I'm talking about a power, and you've already experienced God's power. I said, how have I experienced God's power? He said, have you ever experienced love? I said, yeah. He said, when love is present, are you selfish or selfless? I said, selfless. Are you honest or deceitful? I said, I'm honest. Will you sacrifice of yourself? I said, absolutely, anything. He said, does anybody have to tell you what to do, or is it intuitive? I said, it's intuitive. He said, when love is present, might you run in front of a moving car? Might you push that child out of the way? Might you risk your very life for another human being? I said, absolutely. He said, can anybody stop you? I said, no. He said, did anybody have to tell you to do it? I said, no. He said, well, that's one pretty powerful force that would have you risk your life for another human being. I thought about that for a moment, and I said to him, are you suggesting, God, this is brilliant. How did you come up with this? Are you suggesting that God is love? Because that's brilliant. He said, you never read the Bible, did you? I said, no. He said, well, that's what the sentence says. It says, God is love, period. But you're so stupid, you probably wouldn't have understood it. Turns out, if you look at steps 6 and 7, where it talks about your defects of character, I'll wrap it up in 1 second here. Step 6 and 7, where it talks about your defects of character, it talks about selfishness, dishonesty, and fear being your defects of character, that love removes selfishness, love removes dishonesty, love removes fear. So if you use the word love there, it makes perfect sense. Guys, 22 years ago, I had the profound spiritual awakening. The desire to drink left and has never returned to me. I'm going to share one last thing before I leave. I went to an AA meeting Saturday morning. It was a Saturday morning meeting. It was after I had this experience where I realized I no longer wanted to drink, and I was really alarmed about it. Like Bill Wilson, he was alarmed, probably about his coffee commitment. And Bill didn't have one. And I raised my hand, and I shared for a few minutes that the desire to drink left, and I was experiencing this profound sense of peace. And I got to the door, and a guy pulled on my sleeve. He said, would you sponsor me? I said, I can't. I'm not sober a year. I went home and I called this guy, and he said, who said you had to be sober a year? I said, what do I do with them? He said, do with them what I did with you. But I found out this was really unpopular in where I was. So I told him things like, just don't drink, put the plug in the jug, keep coming back, meeting makers make it, which was all well and fine until the day before my first anniversary, when his wife walked into the morning meeting and said he overdosed and died. I went home and I called this guy. I said, this guy died. And he said, well, I have a question to ask you. I said, what's that? He said, did you tell that man the same truth that I told you? I said, no. He said, why not? I said, because it's not popular. He said, I bet you'll never do that again. Guys, that was 22 years ago. Every Saturday morning since then, I've been going to Talbot House, carrying this message. I've taken hundreds of men through the 12 steps, and I'll leave you with this. This is my experience. The guys who've gone through the 12 steps and have a spiritual awakening, continue to practice these disciplines in their life, I've never seen one relapse. And we're talking lots and lots of guys. And they don't call me every day. Because as my sponsor said, if you need to talk to me every day, how dependent upon God are you really? That was awakening. So I'll leave you with this. If you've not been through the 12 steps, if you've not had a profound spiritual awakening, if your life doesn't feel any different, just you're not drinking, but you're getting more miserable every day, see one of us who have. Ask us to take you through the 12 steps. We'll be glad to. It's my only purpose in AA anymore, to find people I can take through the 12 steps. And that's why I'm here. Thanks for letting me share.